So now we're going to be learning how to name some of these compounds that we've been drawing Lewis structures for. You learned in the last chapter how to name ionic compounds. And in ionic compounds, we don't have to use any kind of prefixes because everything is based on charge. So in a compound like K2O, we call that potassium oxide because we knew that because potassium had a positive 1 charge and oxygen had a negative 2 charge, that those had to be balanced in this particular way so that the total amount of charge on the entire compound would be 0. And so there was no question as to how many of each atom there was going to be. Now when you have covalently bonded molecules, there's not necessarily a hard and fast rule that says we're going to need 1 of this and 2 of this. For example, carbon and oxygen will bind together to make carbon monoxide, which is a compound that if you breathe it in, it will kill you. And they also combine together in a different ratio to make carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is what we continually breathe out of our bodies. So 2 very, very different compounds, both made of carbon and oxygen, but we can't just name them carbon oxide because we wouldn't know which one of these 2 compounds we're talking about. So when we are naming covalently bonded compounds, we have to use prefixes. There is a table in your book that lists about 6 prefixes that you need to have memorized. And I did point that out to you in your lesson plans that you need to have those memorized. So for right now, we're going to do a couple of examples so that you can see how to work those. SF6 is going to be our first example that we're going to work. If I only have 1 of a certain element, you will notice in the table that mono is the prefix that is used. However, if that is the first element in the compound, I don't have to put the mono prefix on it. So this particular compound is called sulfur fluoride. The fluoride has 6 of them. The prefix that means 6 is hexa, so it's going to be hexa fluoride. And I just did what I told you not to do. I misspelled the word fluoride because the U is supposed to come first in that word, F-L-U-O-R-I-D-E. And just like when we named ionic compounds, we're always going to end these in an IDE, not because it's got a negative charge, but just because that's just the way that you name the compound. You stick an IDE on the end of it. Okay, so here in P2O3, I have 2 phosphoruses, not just 1. So if I have more than 1, I have to make sure that I use the proper prefix for that. So the prefix for 2 is di. So I'm going to have diphosphorus. I have 3 oxygens. The prefix for 3 is tri. So that's going to be trioxide. Diphosphorus trioxide. Okay. OCl2. Again, just like on this top one, I have an oxygen, but I just have 1 of them, so I don't need to use a mono on the front. I can just say oxygen, and that's only true on the first one, not on the second one. So oxygen dichloride. Okay? Now you're going to need to be able to go both ways, so let's try to do some examples where we have the name and we're going to learn to flip it the other direction. So here I have dicarbon dihydride. So you're going to take the, I have the name carbon. It has the prefix di, which is the one I use for 2. So it's C2. Dihydride. Hydride is hydrogen. And again, there's a di in front of it. So I would need to use a 2 on that one. Okay, C2H2. We actually drew the Lewis structure for that one when we did the multiple bonds. Nitrogen monoxide. So nitrogen, if I just have the name of the element and there's no prefix on it, that means I only have 1 of them. And again, you'll recall before, I don't need to put that 1 down there because if I don't put anything, it's assumed that there's a 1. Monoxide, oxide is an O and mono means 1. And so there's just going to be 1 of them. So it looks like the word no. So nitrogen monoxide. So here you'll notice that because there's just 1 on the second atom, I have to use the prefix mono, but I don't have to use it if it's the element in the first position. Okay. Finally, tetranitrogen hexahydride. That's a mouthful, isn't it? So I have a nitrogen, and tetra means 4. And then I have another hydride, which is an H, and hexa, which means 6. So tetranitrogen hexahydride is N4H6. So your homework today will have you practicing naming and writing formulas for some of these covalently bonded compounds.